What transforms a human being into a monster? This isn't a philosophical exercise. This is the question that claws at your mind when you first encounter Leatherface, the chainsaw-wielding nightmare who has terrorized audiences for 5 decades. Unlike the supernatural demons and undead creatures that populate horror cinema, Leatherface presents us with something far more unsettling. A monster who bleeds, who fears, who was once just like us. Here's the hook that should chill you to the bone. Leatherface never chose to become a killer. He was manufactured, shaped, molded by forces beyond his control into the perfect instrument of death. Since 1974, this silent giant in a mask of human flesh has carved his way through the collective consciousness of horror fans worldwide. He's appeared in 9 films, countless video games, and has become a Halloween staple, recognized even by those who've never witnessed his blood-soaked rampage. But recognition isn't understanding. To truly comprehend why Leatherface endures, why he disturbs us in ways other horror villains cannot, we must journey back to where the nightmare began and trace the evolution of cinema's most tragic monster. So silence your phones, lock your doors, and prepare to confront the uncomfortable truth. The real horror of Leatherface isn't what he does, it's what was done to him. Picture this. It's 1974. The Vietnam War has left America traumatized and questioning everything. Trust in authority has collapsed. The counterculture dream has curdled into something dark. Into this atmosphere, director Tobe Hooper unleashes something unprecedented. A film so raw, so visceral, that viewers genuinely questioned whether they were watching actual murder. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre wasn't crafted in Hollywood studios with polished scripts and generous budgets. It was forged in the brutal Texas heat, with a crew pushed to their absolute limits. The film stock was grainy, the violence felt documentary real, and at the center of this cinematic nightmare stood a figure that would redefine what horror could be. When we first meet Leatherface, he's not introduced with menacing music or dramatic buildup. He simply appears in a doorway and slams a sledgehammer into a victim's skull. Quick, brutal, efficient. The chainsaw comes later, its mechanical shriek becoming an auditory embodiment of pure panic. But here's what separated Leatherface from every horror villain before him. He wasn't evil incarnate. He was a tool. A guard dog, a damaged human weaponized by his cannibalistic family. Watch the original film carefully, and you'll notice something disturbing in Leatherface's behavior. He's not calculating, he's not sadistic, he's panicked. When he kills, he does so with the frantic energy of someone desperate to please his family, terrified of failing them. His squeals and grunts aren't the sounds of a confident predator, they're the sounds of a frightened child in an adult's body, following orders he doesn't fully understand. This psychological complexity emerged partly by accident and partly by design. Gunnar Hansen, the actor beneath the mask, made specific choices that humanized the monster. The way Leatherface tilts his head in confusion, the way he frantically straightens his tie in one scene, trying to look pretty for guests. These moments reveal someone trapped, someone whose identity has been completely subsumed by his family's grotesque expectations. The mask itself deserves its own examination. Created from the face of a victim, it represents the ultimate theft of identity. Leatherface wears the faces of others because he has none of his own. Throughout the franchise, he'll change masks depending on his mood or role. The pretty woman mask, the old lady mask, the killer mask. Each one a different persona forced upon someone with no sense of self. And then there's the chainsaw, loud, industrial, utterly lacking in subtlety. Where Michael Myers stalked with a kitchen knife and Jason Voorhees used whatever came to hand, Leatherface wielded a tool of his former trade. In some versions, he worked in a slaughterhouse before it closed, leaving his family desperate and turning to darker methods of survival. The chainsaw's roar announced death from a distance. There's no stealth, no surprise, just raw mechanical terror bearing down on you. The film's marketing capitalized on fears of the real. Based on a true story, the posters screamed. This was technically a deception, but rooted in disturbing fact. The filmmakers drew inspiration from Ed Gein, the Wisconsin killer who'd fashioned trophies from human remains, including masks and furniture from skin and bone. This connection to reality, the knowledge that such atrocities had occurred, elevated Leatherface beyond fantasy. He became a possibility, a nightmare that could be real.
Horror franchises are notorious for diluting their villains, transforming terrifying threats into cartoon characters. Jason became increasingly supernatural. Freddy became a wisecracking showman. But Leatherface's journey through sequels, remakes, and reboots reveals something more complex. A character constantly being reinterpreted through different lenses of horror and humanity. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, 1986, took a sharp turn into satirical territory. Tube Hooper returned, but with a bigger budget and a darker sense of humor. The Sawyer family became grotesque entrepreneurs, winning chili cook-offs with their special ingredient. Leatherface gained a bizarre romantic subplot with the female protagonist. The film divided audiences. Was this genius satire of American capitalism, or was it spitting on the original's legacy? Here's what it revealed. Leatherface could be molded into different narratives. In this version, he's almost sympathetic in his confusion, his childlike desire for connection twisted into grotesque courtship rituals. The film asks uncomfortable questions. Can a monster experience love? Does his desire for affection make him more or less human? The subsequent sequels, Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, struggled to find consistent footing. Different families, different backstories, different motivations. Each film seemed to reinvent who Leatherface was and why he killed. This inconsistency frustrated some fans, but revealed an interesting truth. Leatherface was malleable in ways other slasher icons weren't. He could be recontextualized because, at his core, he's a reflection of whoever controls him. Then came 2003. The remake arrived in an era of gritty horror reboots, and it understood something crucial. Modern audiences craved psychological depth. They wanted to understand their monsters. So the filmmakers gave Leatherface, now named Thomas Hewitt, a full tragic backstory. We witness his birth, abandoned in a slaughterhouse. We see him bullied mercilessly for facial deformities. We watch as the only world he knows collapses, leaving his adoptive family desperate and turning to murder for survival. By the time Thomas dons his first mask of human skin, we've been forced to empathize with his suffering. The 2003 remake and its prequel, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning, commit fully to this interpretation. Leatherface as victim, a damaged individual who, under different circumstances, might have lived a peaceful life. His violence becomes a tragedy, his mask a shield against a world that only showed him cruelty. This approach divided horror fans. Some found it added necessary depth, transforming Leatherface from a simple boogeyman into a commentary on how society creates its monsters. Others argued it demystified what made the original terrifying, that unknowable, inexplicable horror. The 2017 prequel pushed even further into origin story territory, showing his youth in a corrupt mental institution, the manipulations of his mother, Verna, and the specific moment of transformation when a boy becomes a killer. By the film's end, we've witnessed every step of his descent. Most recently, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022 presented an elderly Leatherface, still killing decades after the original massacre. This version asks, what happens when a monster simply continues? When there's no reformation, no redemption, just endless violence stretching across generations? Each interpretation reveals something about the era that produced it. The original captured 1970s anxieties about the collapse of social order. The 2003 remake reflected post-9/11 concerns about hidden threats and psychological trauma. The 2022 film speaks to contemporary fears about violence becoming institutionalized, unstoppable, a permanent feature of the landscape.
Let's talk about what makes Leatherface uniquely disturbing on a psychological level. Most slasher villains hide their face, but their masks serve different purposes. Michael Myers wears a blank white mask. He's the embodiment of emotionless evil, the Shape. Jason's hockey mask is armor, protection for his deformed face. Freddy doesn't need a mask because his burned face serves the same purpose, a visual representation of his monstrous nature. But Leatherface? He wears the faces of his victims. This is profoundly different. This is identity theft in its most literal, horrifying form. He doesn't just kill you, he takes your face and makes it his own. He inhabits your identity because he has none of his own to inhabit. Throughout the franchise, we see Leatherface change masks depending on context. When doing household chores, he might wear the old lady mask, adopting a domestic persona. When confronting victims, the pretty woman mask appears, an attempt to seem less threatening perhaps, or to embody a feminine caretaker role his family forces upon him. And when killing, the raw, terrifying killer mask, stitched and crude, expressing pure violence. These aren't just costume changes, they're dissociative episodes. Leatherface literally cannot maintain a stable sense of self, so he fragments into whatever role his family demands. In psychological terms, this resembles dissociative identity disorder taken to its most extreme conclusion, but caused not just by trauma alone, but by systematic abuse and deprivation of any individual identity from birth. Consider the implications. Leatherface may not even understand he's wearing human faces. To him, this might simply be how one presents themselves to the world. His family normalized it. They celebrated it. They made it mandatory. He knows nothing else. This makes him perhaps the most tragic figure in horror cinema. Michael Myers chose evil. Freddy Krueger revels in it. Jason seeks revenge. But Leatherface? He's a blank slate upon which his family have written their twisted values, and he has no framework to even question what's been done to him. The chainsaw, too, carries psychological weight. It's not a subtle weapon. It's loud, messy, overwhelming. Some analysts suggest it represents Leatherface's internal chaos made external. Others see it as a comfort object, a tool from his previous life at the slaughterhouse, something familiar in an incomprehensible existence. When threatened, when frightened, when uncertain, he reaches for the chainsaw because its roar drowns out everything else, including his own confusion and fear.
Why has Leatherface transcended his films to become a cultural icon? The answer lies in what he represents. The American dream decayed into nightmare. The Sawyer family, or Hewitt family depending on continuity, embodies a specific American archetype: the rural poor, the forgotten, those left behind by economic progress. In the original film, we learn the family worked in the slaughterhouse industry until automation eliminated their jobs. Unable or unwilling to adapt, they turned their skills toward darker purposes. This taps into deep anxieties about rural America, about the others living just beyond civilization's borders. The original film's setting, an isolated Texas farmhouse surrounded by endless, empty landscapes, creates a geography of horror. Out here, normal rules don't apply. Out here, families have become feral. Leatherface personifies these fears. He's the embodiment of what happens when communities collapse, when economic desperation strips away humanity, when family becomes cult. He's an American Gothic nightmare, the dark mirror to Norman Rockwell's idealized families. The franchise has been remarkably prescient about American anxieties. The original captured 1970s fears about societal breakdown. The 1990s sequels reflected anxieties about hidden depravity behind suburban normalcy. The 2000s remakes engaged with post-9/11 paranoia about unseen threats. The 2022 film speaks to contemporary concerns about generational trauma and violence as inheritance. Beyond the films themselves, Leatherface has infiltrated popular culture in fascinating ways. He's appeared in Mortal Kombat X and Dead by Daylight as a playable character, allowing gamers to literally inhabit the killer's role. He is a perennial Halloween costume, his chainsaw and leather mask instantly recognizable even to those unfamiliar with the source material. Musicians and artists reference him constantly. Heavy metal bands invoke his imagery to represent primal violence. Horror artists reimagine him endlessly. He's become shorthand for a specific type of fear, not supernatural, not fantastical, but human horror taken to its extreme. Perhaps most tellingly, Leatherface has become a queer icon in some circles. The character's fluid identity, his donning of different masks and personas, his complete rejection of traditional masculinity despite his imposing physical presence, these elements have resonated with audiences, exploring themes of identity and performance. While certainly not the filmmaker's original intention, this reinterpretation speaks to the character's complexity and the various ways audiences can engage with horror metaphors.
So we return to our original question. What makes Leatherface truly terrifying? It's not the mask, though the mask is horrifying. It's not the chainsaw, though the chainsaw is viscerally effective. It's not even the violence, though the violence is brutal and unrelenting. What makes Leatherface terrifying is his humanity. He can be hurt, he can feel fear, he experiences confusion, anxiety, desperation to please his family. He's not an unstoppable supernatural force, he's a broken human being, which makes him somehow more frightening than any demon or ghost. When we watch Michael Myers stalk victims, we're witnessing something alien to human experience. When we watch Leatherface, we're witnessing what humans can become when stripped of identity, subjected to abuse, and molded into weapons. We're confronting the uncomfortable truth that monsters aren't born, they're made. Every version of Leatherface, from the silent brute of 1974 to the tragic victim of the remakes to the elderly killer of 2022, shares this core. He is both perpetrator and victim, killer and killed soul. He wields the chainsaw, but he's as much a tool as the weapon itself, wielded by his family, by his circumstances, by the cruelty that shaped him. This duality creates horror that lingers. After the film ends, after the chainsaw falls silent, we're left with questions that have no comfortable answers. How much responsibility does Leatherface bear for his actions? Can someone raised without any moral framework be held accountable? Where does victimhood end and evil begin? The franchise rarely answers these questions definitively. Different films take different positions. But the questions themselves, that's what keeps us returning. That's what makes Leatherface more than just another slasher villain. He's a philosophical puzzle wrapped in human skin, wielding a chainsaw and squealing in fear and rage. In our current era, when discussions of nature versus nurture, of trauma and accountability, of systemic violence and individual choice dominate discourse, Leatherface feels more relevant than ever. He's a case study in how environments create outcomes, how families can be sites of horror rather than safety, how individuals can be destroyed and remade into something monstrous. The chainsaw keeps revving because the questions keep coming. The terror persists because it's rooted not in fantasy, but in possibility. We know humans are capable of extraordinary cruelty. We know that abuse creates cycles of violence. We know that some people are dealt such catastrophic hands in life that their outcomes seem predetermined. Leatherface embodies all of this while maintaining enough mystery to remain frightening. Even in versions with detailed backstories, there's something unknowable about him, something irreducibly inhuman despite his humanity. He exists in the liminal space between victim and monster, and that space is where true horror lives. So yes, the mask is frightening, the chainsaw is effective, the violence is disturbing. But what really makes Leatherface one of horror cinema's greatest and most enduring icons is what he represents about us, about human potential for both suffering and inflicting suffering, about how easily identity can be stripped away, about what happens when the fundamental building block of society, the family, becomes something poisonous. 5 decades after his first appearance, Leatherface remains relevant because we still haven't answered the questions he raises. We still fear what he represents. We still recognize in his twisted, tragic existence uncomfortable truths about humanity itself. The chainsaw never stops because the horror is eternal, and it was always human. What's your take? Which incarnation disturbs you most? Drop your thoughts below. Subscribe for more horror deep dives, and remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we create ourselves.